He cried every time someone touched him. Not a whimper. Not a bark. A cry, high-pitched, hollow, full of something that didn't sound like pain, but something worse. Fear. Memory. Surrender. In the stillness of the shelter's early morning hours, the sound cut through metal bars and concrete like a razor. Volunteers froze when they heard it. Some turned away. Others stopped trying altogether. The dog in Kennel 9 had made it clear, he did not want to be touched. He didn't bite. He didn't lunge. He simply cried, as if every hand that reached toward him was a promise of pain. His name, at least on the paperwork, was Kaiser. 4 years old. Male. German Shepherd. No chip. No tags. No history, just a note scribbled hastily in the intake log, found tied behind a barn. No food. No water. Unknown how long. Kaiser lay flat against the corner of his kennel, his spine curved to match the wall, his paws folded beneath him like he was trying to disappear. His coat was a dull shadow of what it should have been, patches missing, tufts matted, as if the richness of his breed had been scraped away by time and neglect. But it was his eyes that people remembered. They weren't wild. They weren't angry. They were vacant. Not the kind of emptiness that comes with peace, but the kind that suggested he'd stopped expecting anything good from the world. Staff took turns feeding him, though he rarely ate when anyone was watching. His water bowl was filled and emptied with little change in its level. Some suspected he only moved when the lights went off and the doors were locked. He never made a sound, except when someone tried to reach him. And yet, even in that silence, there was something haunting. Something unfinished. Like the final pages of a book that had been torn out. Most people walked past Kennel 9 without stopping. Some glanced in and felt a pang of something, guilt, pity, helplessness, before looking away. But every now and then, someone would pause. Someone would meet those dark, lifeless eyes and wonder what had happened. What kind of life had turned a strong, noble creature into a ghost curled in a concrete box? That's where this story begins, not with a rescue, not with a second chance, but with a dog who didn't believe in either. And with one woman who did. Her name was Elena Ross. And everything was about to change. Before he was Kaiser, he had no name anyone remembered. No collar. No documents. No whispers of a former life. Just the body of a dog that once might have been magnificent, found tied behind a rotting barn on the outskirts of a forgotten stretch of farmland. The rope around his neck was frayed, like it had been chewed halfway through. A rusted bucket sat nearby, long emptied. Beneath him, only dirt and straw, soaked and hardened by days, or weeks, of weather. It was a county utility worker who spotted him first. She had pulled over when her truck's GPS lost signal and took a wrong turn down a gravel road that didn't even have a name. What she saw made her stop breathing for a second, a silhouette behind the barn, motionless, the color of ash and bark and bone. He didn't bark. He didn't run. He didn't even lift his head. The woman got out of the truck slowly, uncertain whether she was approaching a dog or its shadow. She called out. Nothing. She stepped closer. Still nothing. It wasn't until she crouched down, maybe 5 feet from him, that she saw his chest rise, shallow, shaky, like it was reluctant to keep going. When she reached for her phone to call animal control, his ears flinched at the sound, then went still. Later, the responding officer would note in the intake report, dog made no sound during transport. Did not resist leash. Would not make eye contact. No sign of aggression, but significant trauma suspected. They brought him to the shelter in the back of a crate, more to protect him from the world than the world from him. A volunteer opened the door gently. He didn't come out. They left it open overnight. By morning, he had stepped out and curled himself into the furthest corner of the kennel. He stayed there. Days passed. Then a week. The staff tried coaxing him out with food, with soft voices, even with other dogs nearby. Nothing worked. When someone knelt to offer a hand, he would lower his head and release that same haunting cry, a sound no one forgot. Not a protest. Not a challenge. A resignation. No one knew how long he had been out there. No one came forward to claim him. His body was lean, but not starving. Just neglected. As if whoever left him had remembered to keep him alive, but not to make him feel alive. One of the veterinary assistants, during his first health check, discovered faint scars beneath the fur around his shoulders. Old wounds. In places a dog couldn't have made on his own. That told them more than any missing microchip ever could. The team named him Kaiser, a nod to his breed's noble lineage, perhaps out of hope rather than accuracy. But in those first days, the name felt too grand, almost cruelly ironic. Because Kaiser didn't carry himself like royalty. He didn't walk at all. He cowered, folded into the walls like wallpaper. If another dog barked nearby, his whole body would twitch. If someone dropped a clipboard, he would press his face into the ground as if bracing for a blow. He wasn't aggressive. He wasn't defiant. He had already surrendered, not to the shelter, but to something far deeper. The world had failed him once, maybe more than once. And now, all that was left was a shell of a dog waiting for the next failure to arrive. By the time Elena Ross first walked into the shelter, Kaiser had been there 23 days. 23 days of silence. 23 days of untouched food, minimal movement, and those low, chilling cries. The staff had begun avoiding his kennel. Not out of fear. Out of heartbreak. And yet, as fate would have it, Kaiser's story hadn't ended behind that barn. It was only just beginning. Elena Ross never planned on falling in love with broken things. She didn't carry herself like a hero. No dramatic entrance, no voice that filled a room. At 34, she was soft-spoken, deliberate in movement, with a quiet intensity that made even the most anxious creatures feel like they could breathe a little easier. Her days were split between the sterile light of a veterinary clinic and the dull gray corridors of a county shelter where time moved slowly and second chances ran out fast. She wasn't new to pain. She'd seen enough of it in the faces of animals who came through her clinic, eyes clouded with confusion, legs trembling with exhaustion. But the shelter was different. Here, pain lingered in the air like a fog. It clung to the bars, to the worn-out blankets, to the hardened expressions of volunteers who had seen too many good dogs fade behind locked doors. Elena came twice a week. Always the same days. Always the same time. No fanfare. She didn't announce herself or ask for special assignments. She cleaned bowls, walked the ones who could be walked, and sat quietly with the ones who couldn't. Her presence was consistent. Predictable. Like the sunrise. The first time she saw Kaiser, she didn't even know his name. She was walking down the back row of kennels, carrying a small container of medications and a clipboard when she felt something, an absence, more than a presence. The air near Kennel 9 felt heavier. Still. She stopped, glanced sideways, and saw him. A large German shepherd, pressed so tightly into the back corner that his body seemed to be trying to become part of the wall. His head was low. His paws tucked in. His chest barely rose. He looked like a statue carved from grief. She didn't move closer. Didn't kneel or speak his name. She simply looked at him, quietly, and something in her shifted. Later, she asked a staff member about the dog in Kennel 9. "Oh," they said with a sigh. "That's Kaiser. Don't bother. He doesn't like people. Cries when you get too close. We've tried everything." But Elena didn't try everything. She didn't try anything at all. The next day, she returned with no agenda. She finished her tasks early and sat cross-legged on the floor across from Kaiser's kennel. She didn't bring toys. No treats. No clipboard. Just herself. Minutes passed. Then an hour. He didn't look at her. Didn't move. But he didn't cry either. That was enough. She came again. And again. Always wearing the same soft green hoodie. Always with her hair pulled back in the same loose bun. No sudden movements. No expectations. By the fourth visit, she noticed something different. When she rounded the corner toward Kennel 9, Kaiser didn't flinch. His eyes tracked her. He didn't move, but he didn't recoil. Progress. She began to bring pieces of chicken, gently cooked and shredded, wrapped in parchment and tucked into a small cloth pouch. She never tossed it. Never forced it into the kennel. She placed it just outside the bars, then sat back and waited. The food never disappeared while she was there. But by the next morning, it was always gone. It was a game of patience. Of inches, not miles. A slow unraveling of fear. One visit, she leaned a little closer to the gate and hummed, not a song, just a low vibration in her throat, something that sounded more like a heartbeat than a tune. Kaiser's ears twitched. That was all. But it was the first time he had responded to sound without recoiling. She never celebrated out loud. Never marked his progress with cheers or excitement. That wasn't what Kaiser needed. He needed stillness. And Elena could give him that. While others saw a dog too far gone, she saw something else, not the fear in his eyes, but the strength it took to survive with that fear. She didn't know how long it would take. She didn't know if it would ever be enough. But she made herself a silent promise as she left that day. She would keep coming back. And she wouldn't leave him behind. It happened on a Tuesday. The shelter was unusually quiet that morning. A light drizzle fell outside, muffling the sounds of the city beyond the walls. Inside, the fluorescent lights hummed softly, the air filled with the scent of antiseptic and damp fur. Elena walked the hallway toward Kennel 9 with slow, measured steps, a cloth pouch of chicken tucked beneath her arm, her hoodie damp at the shoulders. Kaiser was where he always was, pressed against the back wall of his kennel, still as stone, eyes half-lidded, watching her with that same unreadable expression. But something felt different. Elena didn't sit in her usual spot that day. She moved a little closer, not past the bars, not enough to intrude, but near enough that her presence settled just outside his world. She folded her legs beneath her and placed a single strip of chicken on the floor near the gate. Then she waited. The rain pattered against the shelter roof like a slow, steady heartbeat. Somewhere down the hall, a young Labrador barked twice before going quiet again. Kaiser didn't flinch. Elena leaned her back against the wall and let the minutes pass. 10. 15. 20. Then, a flicker. Kaiser's nose twitched. He didn't lift his head, but his nostrils flared slightly. His eyes shifted from her to the chicken, then back again. Elena didn't move. She didn't speak. She hardly breathed. Another few minutes slipped by. And then, with a slow, cautious motion, Kaiser uncurled his front legs and placed one paw forward. It was a small step, no more than a shift in weight, a repositioning of limbs, but it wasn't fear-driven. It wasn't an attempt to retreat. It was curiosity. The strip of chicken remained untouched, but Elena felt her heart pound all the same. She whispered, almost to herself, "You're doing great, Kaiser." The name had become more than a label by now. It was a connection, a bridge she crossed carefully each time she spoke it. The next visit, she came prepared. Another drizzle. Another quiet morning. Another cloth pouch filled with chicken. This time, she placed the food slightly closer to the gate, still on the outside, but just within his field of vision. She didn't hum. She didn't speak. She simply sat, her palms resting face up on her knees. Kaiser didn't move for the first 15 minutes. But he watched. Not with suspicion, not with fear, but with thought. That alone was progress. He shifted again, this time pushing up onto his haunches. His ears were angled toward her, his gaze flicking between her hands and the food. Then, cautiously, he rose. His legs were stiff, as though unused to supporting his full weight. But he stood. Not to retreat. Not to flee. To approach. Elena stayed perfectly still as Kaiser padded slowly, tentatively toward the bars. He paused with every step, his body low, head dipped. The air between them felt electric, taut with something fragile and new. He reached the food. He sniffed. And then, in one swift movement, he took it and stepped back, not all the way to the corner, but far enough to feel safe again. Elena didn't move. Didn't reach. She let the moment sit there, glowing in its own quiet victory. She left that day with a warmth in her chest she hadn't let herself feel before. The dog who cried at every touch had taken a step forward. No panic. No flinch. Just trust, in its earliest form. The shelter manager, Mitchell, paused her as she signed out. "How's Kaiser?" Elena looked up, her expression unreadable for a second. Then she smiled. "He took food from the gate." Mitchell raised an eyebrow. "While you were sitting there?" She nodded. "No cry. No cry." He exhaled. "That's a start." It was more than a start. It was the first quiet thread of connection, pulled from a place deeper than words, woven by patience, fear, and the tiniest flicker of hope. And Kaiser had tugged on it. Elena arrived early that morning, just after sunrise. The sky was streaked with soft gray clouds, and the air carried that clean, weightless scent that comes before a storm. She parked in her usual spot, locked her car, and walked toward the shelter entrance with calm, steady steps. In her right hand, she carried a small container of chicken breast, still warm from the skillet. In her left pocket, tucked neatly between a folded towel and a travel-size bottle of lavender spray, was something new, something she hadn't used before. A pair of soft, powder blue rubber gloves. They weren't for protection. She wasn't afraid of Kaiser. No one was. But after weeks of observation, she needed to know something. Was it the hands he feared, or the feeling of being touched? The hallway to the kennels was quiet, the fluorescent lights humming above. As she approached Kennel 9, she saw him already awake, his eyes watching her, his head lifted slightly from the blanket she'd left for him the week before. That, in itself, was remarkable. "Morning, Kaiser," she said softly, her voice barely above a whisper. He didn't cry. He didn't retreat. Elena knelt just outside the gate, letting the chicken rest beside her. She pulled the gloves from her pocket and sat with them for a moment in her lap. Then, slowly and deliberately, she slipped them on, one finger at a time, making sure the soft stretch of rubber didn't startle him. Kaiser's ears flicked. His eyes narrowed slightly, focused. But he didn't flinch. She exhaled. Progress. She didn't reach for him. Not yet. Instead, she opened the container and pulled out a single strip of shredded chicken. She placed it gently on the ground between them, just past the threshold of the kennel gate. Then she scooted back, folding her hands into her lap again. Kaiser stared at the food. Then at her. Then back at the food. The seconds dragged, slow and breathless. Finally, his front paw lifted. He stepped forward. One step. Then another. His head low, nose twitching, muscles tense. He reached the chicken, hesitated, then picked it up with a quick, careful snap of his jaws. He chewed twice, swallowed, and retreated, not all the way, just a couple feet. Elena waited. She placed another piece, closer this time. Same rhythm. Same silence. Kaiser moved again, a little quicker now. Less hesitation. Another success. Then came the moment. Elena took one final strip of chicken and held it in her open palm, resting her gloved hand gently on her knee. No movement. No sudden invitation. Just a quiet offering, no closer than before. Kaiser stared at it for a long time. He looked at the food. At her face. At the gloves. Then, step by step, he came forward. His nose reached her hand first. A light touch, like the brush of wind across skin. Then, carefully, he took the chicken from her palm. His mouth never closed around her fingers. His eyes never left hers. He backed away, slow but calm. No yelp. No panic. Elena sat frozen, not from fear, but awe. She whispered, "Good boy." And this time, Kaiser didn't look away. She stayed with him another 20 minutes, offering nothing more. Just her presence. Just the air between them, now filled with something delicate and real. When she finally stood to leave, she removed the gloves, folded them gently, and whispered over her shoulder. "You're not afraid of touch, are you?" She didn't expect an answer. But for the first time since he arrived, Kaiser moved forward instead of back. And that was answer enough. The call came just before lunch. Elena had just finished wrapping a soft bandage around a limping spaniel's leg at the clinic when her phone buzzed in her pocket. She glanced at the screen, Mitchell. She stepped outside into the alley behind the clinic to answer. The wind had picked up, tugging strands of her hair loose from her bun. "Hey," she said. "Everything okay?" There was a pause on the other end. Too long. "Elena," Mitchell began, "we need to talk about Kaiser." Her stomach tightened. She leaned against the brick wall, steadying herself. "What about him?" Another pause, this one heavier. "There was a board meeting last night," Mitchell said, his voice lower now, like he didn't want anyone else to hear. Kaiser came up. She said nothing. Just listened, heart thudding hard against her ribs. "They're worried," he continued. "It's been nearly a month. He still won't let anyone else near him. You're the only one he responds to." "I'm working with him," Elena said quickly. "He's improving. He took food from my hand. He let me sit in the kennel. That's not nothing." "I know," Mitchell said. "Believe me, I know. But the board, they're looking at space. Numbers. Resources." A gust of wind swept through the alley. Elena pressed her hand over her eyes, fighting back the heat rising in her throat. "What are they saying?" she asked. Mitchell sighed. "They've scheduled a transfer. 2 weeks from today." "To where?" "A behavioral rehab facility upstate. High volume. Short timelines. The kind of place where if a dog doesn't show fast progress." He trailed off, but she didn't need him to finish. She closed her eyes. Saw Kaiser's face. His stillness. His quiet steps. The tentative touch of his nose to her palm. All of that had taken weeks. He didn't move on anyone's timeline but his own. And that was exactly why he needed her. "He won't survive that," she said. Her voice cracked, and she didn't try to hide it. "Not emotionally. Maybe not physically." "I don't disagree," Mitchell said. "But unless something changes fast." "I want to file a foster request," she said, interrupting him. "Today." There was silence. "Elena, are you sure?" He still flinches. He's not leash trained. He's barely functioning outside his kennel. I don't need him to be perfect, she replied. I need him to be safe. I need him to have a chance. Mitchell didn't answer right away. She could hear the murmur of voices behind him, phones ringing in the shelter lobby. I'll start the paperwork, he said at last. But you'll need to prove he can be handled. That he can adapt. The board won't approve anything without proof. I'll give them proof, Elena said. I'll show them what he is, not just what he was. That afternoon, she drove straight from the clinic to the shelter. She didn't go into the kennel. She didn't call his name. She simply laid a folded blanket just inside the gate, placed her hand beside it, and whispered, "You're running out of time, Kaiser. And I won't let them take you. But you have to meet me halfway." Then, for the first time, she let her fingers brush against the side of his cheek. He didn't cry. He didn't flinch. He closed his eyes, slowly, like a man stepping into sleep after years of noise. And that was when she knew. No matter what it took, she would not let him go. The next morning, Elena arrived at the shelter just as the sun was rising, the sky painted in soft gold and pale lavender. The building was quiet, not yet filled with the usual shuffle of volunteers or the low hum of conversation. She stepped through the side entrance, a small cloth pouch of shredded chicken in one hand and something else in the other, a plan. Today was not going to be like the others. Today, she would try something bold. The blanket she'd left inside Kaiser's kennel was still there, slightly rumpled, the imprint of his body faintly visible on its surface. He looked up when she arrived, ears twitching, eyes watchful but calm. He was no longer the trembling ghost she had first seen. There was something different in the way he watched her now, something that looked like recognition. "Hey, buddy," she said softly, kneeling by the gate. "You ready to try something new?" From her jacket pocket, she pulled out the leash. It wasn't one of the standard shelter leads, those stiff, cold nylon straps that snapped too loud and smelled like disinfectant. No, this one was soft, woven cotton, warm from having spent days in her coat, soaked in her scent. She laid it gently on the floor beside her. Kaiser didn't move. But he didn't retreat, either. She opened the container of chicken, tore a strip into pieces, and laid them out one by one in a breadcrumb trail, starting from his blanket, leading all the way to the open kennel door. Then she waited. It was slow at first. Kaiser stood cautiously, his movements careful and deliberate. He sniffed the first piece, then the next, each time looking back at her as if checking for permission. He reached the threshold of the kennel, paused, ears flicking. "Good boy," she whispered. Then he stepped out. The air outside was crisp, tinged with dew. The courtyard behind the shelter was small and enclosed, with a patch of grass bordered by worn wooden fencing. Kaiser stood still for a long moment, overwhelmed by space, sky, and sound. His eyes darted in every direction. His chest rose and fell in sharp, uncertain breaths. Elena knelt beside him, keeping her profile low, non-threatening. She said nothing. She let the silence do the talking. "You're safe," she whispered after a while. "Take your time." Slowly, Kaiser lowered his nose to the grass and sniffed. The smells of earth, dew, and unfamiliar dogs flooded his senses. He took one step, then another. His posture was alert but not rigid. There was no tail tucking, no panic. He walked. Elena watched him, her chest tight with hope. For the first time, she wasn't seeing a traumatized animal. She was seeing a dog, still cautious, still healing, but walking on his own 4 feet into something bigger than a kennel. They stayed in the courtyard nearly an hour. At one point, Kaiser lay down beside her, his side brushing her leg, his breathing steady. He didn't rest his head on her, but he didn't move away either. It was more than progress. It was proof. By the time they returned inside, the sun was higher in the sky and the shelter was beginning to stir. Mitchell met her near the front office. "The board wants a behavioral report before they review your foster request," he said. "They'll vote tomorrow." "I've got what they need," she replied. She didn't mean the chicken or the leash. She meant the dog beside her, still quiet, still guarded, but no longer broken. Kaiser was walking into the world again. And now, time was the only enemy left. The call came at 11:17 a.m. Mitchell had just returned from checking on a delivery when the front desk phone rang, its tone sharp and unexpected in the midday lull. He picked up out of habit, expecting a missed appointment or an inquiry about adoption hours. Instead, a gruff voice greeted him, low and direct. "Yeah, I'm calling about a dog. German Shepherd. Black and tan. Might go by the name Kaiser. 4 years old. I think he ended up there." Mitchell's posture straightened instinctively. He motioned to the front desk volunteer to hold her next task and turned slightly away from the counter. "May I ask who's calling?" "Name's Eric Dalton," the man said quickly. "Dog went missing a few months back. No chip. But he's mine." Mitchell flipped open the intake folder. No mention of an owner. No flyers. No leads. The case had been logged as abandonment. "I see," Mitchell said carefully. "Can you tell me when and where you last saw the dog?" Dalton gave vague descriptions. A street that didn't match the intake location. A story about a gate left open. He claimed a cousin had been watching the dog and forgot to check the fence. He said he'd searched for weeks. No police report. No lost dog listing. No vet records mentioned. When Mitchell pressed for details, Dalton's tone changed. "Look," he snapped. "I don't need an interrogation. I just want to see my damn dog. You've had him long enough." Mitchell didn't like the way his stomach turned. He'd heard voices like this before, sharp on the outside, hollow underneath. Something didn't sit right. "I'll have someone from our behavioral team return your call," Mitchell said, masking his unease. "What number can we reach you at?" Dalton gave it, muttering something under his breath before hanging up. Mitchell sat for a moment, the silence in the room feeling too loud. He didn't tell the caller that Kaiser was under special behavioral care. He didn't tell him Kaiser had already made progress, or that a foster request was pending. And most of all, he didn't tell him that someone had already started fighting for the dog. Elena arrived later that afternoon, as usual. She carried a soft rope leash, not to use just yet, but to let Kaiser continue getting familiar with it. He greeted her with the same quiet alertness, the same cautious steps. She knelt by the kennel gate and held out her hand, palm up. For the first time, Kaiser leaned forward and rested his head against her fingers. Her breath caught. "You're trusting me now, huh?" she whispered. He blinked slowly, the way dogs do when they're not afraid. Mitchell found her as she was getting ready to leave. "There was a call this morning," he said quietly. A man claimed to be Kaiser's original owner. Elena's smile faded. "What did he say?" "He claims the dog got loose. No paperwork. No chip. Said the markings match." He sounded off. "Did you tell him anything?" "I said someone would follow up," Mitchell replied. "But legally, if he comes in with old vet records or anything credible, we might be forced to release Kaiser." Elena's jaw tightened. She looked toward the kennel where Kaiser now lay curled on his blanket, eyes half-lidded but watching them. "He can't go back there," she said. "You've seen how he reacts to people. He wasn't just abandoned. He was hurt." Mitchell nodded. "I agree. But we'll need proof. Let me file the foster paperwork today," she said. "Make it official." "I'll get it started," he said. But be prepared. If this guy shows up in person with documentation, it could get messy. 2 days later, it did. A tall man in his late 40s pushed through the shelter doors, the bell above the entrance clanging sharply. He wore a faded trucker cap